Tonight, I am going to be continuing to talk about the book Interconnected by Galwan Karmapa. And I am starting out with chapter 11 now. And this chapter is titled Lenses for a Global Society. And when he's talking about lenses, he's referring to lenses on a camera or a video recorder that you can put a lens on it and see things close up, or you can zoom out and see things from more of a distance, and then you can really zoom out and get a much broader picture in your camera. So the purpose of this whole book, Interconnected, is to see clearly and carefully about the direction we are going in. And we refers to the whole world, not just you or me or our Sangha. And the time to change is now, he feels, that we are not headed in a good direction. And the sooner we can change directions, the better it will be for the world and for every inhabitant in the world. So what he wants to do is explore more realistic and sustainable models for our relationship to the world in general and to our society, our country. We are connected in three different ways that he talks about in this chapter. There are many other ways that we are connected, but he specifically focuses on our family relationships, our friendship relationships, and then our world relationships. As a result, we can look at each of these three levels and see how we relate to these three levels and how we can benefit by understanding these three different types of relationships. And he stresses right now in the beginning of this 11th chapter, that we need to be fully inclusive and not favor or privilege a particular group, whether it be our family, our friends, a particular country, and so forth. We have global citizenship, and he says we've got a global family, and we have global friends. So this is an important point to remember. The next section of this chapter is global citizenship. Here he begins by saying that we all have rights and responsibilities that we share with everybody. The regard to national boundaries, it's not that important when it comes to our global responsibilities. First of all, every human has a right to live on the planet. It's not, well, some people have a better claim on living on the planet than others, that everybody has a similar right to live on the planet, and that the resources of the planet need to be shared. That's the first point. And he says to think about what are the emotional and mental impacts of this model. It can sound idealistic and distant when it's phrased this way, and that people often look to the government to solve their problems. I give them, you might say, a little more than their fair share, and so forth. And this can lead to a feeling that you are separate from people that don't live in your country or you're part of the country. It fosters an us versus them mentality. And we need to get away from that. We need to feel connected to other people. We have to be willing to share the resources of our country and the world. So here is a quote by Galen Karmapa. Is modeling our connection to others on citizenship the best foundation for cultivating an open heart and mind, strengthening our empathy and compassion, and sustaining our motivation to make positive changes in our global human community? So I thought that maybe this would be a good time to actually have a discussion. So now he talks about in the next section of this chapter, the global family. This is looking at the broad lens of a global family. So we can learn a lot from our connection to a loving, caring family when we were young, and maybe even as now we are getting older and aging, that a family can make you feel safe, protected, cared about. It can be an incubator for developing those qualities in ourselves as we grow up. He also mentions that that was a kind of situation he grew up in, and lots of people do not grow up in a family like that. But he feels that this kind of a family model is a great model for us to develop our emotional awareness of interdependence, of how we are related to other people and how taking care of them is very closely related to our own emotional and physical health. Quote, this gives us the opportunity to feel that vital truth of interdependence, that others are part of who we are and we are part of others. Now, he talks about the fabricated self in The Heart is Noble. And he doesn't mention much of it here, but I thought it would be good to discuss that a little bit. And that is that the idea that we develop about who we are, it really starts with the family that we come into as a newborn child, whether it's your birth family or adoptive family, foster family, or whatever, that our first impressions as a newborn baby are that we get a name from somebody else. Maybe it's our birth mother, maybe it's been given to you by somebody else, but you don't choose what your name is, either first or your last name. It's given to you, assigned to you. And then we take on this identity. We associate that name with who we are, and then we develop all kinds of ideas about who we are besides this name. We think, I like this, I don't like that. We assimilate a language, we think in a language, we speak in a particular language, and there are just all kinds of cultural things that we incorporate into who we are. And then specifically, we take on things that We hear from others nowadays, kids can be on the internet with their digital device at a very early age, and they come into contact with everything from ads to games and video games, I mean. Bring this into your identity of who you are. And basically, this idea is that this fabricated self is put together from parts and pieces that we take from the outer environment. And we think somehow or another, this is who I am. I am different from other people. And we usually think, and I'm special. And it's interesting when we think that we're special, sometimes we think we're especially bad. We're especially good at being bad. Sometimes we think we're especially good at being good. Sometimes we just think we're especially special. Good or bad has nothing to do with it. Just, I'm special. And that's this idea of this fabricated self. So we can bring things that are very beneficial from our childhood, and we can bring things from childhood that are really problematic. But if we can focus on the nurturing and the care that we got as a child and understand that and understand the relationship that we had at that age with people that cared about us at some level or another, this can be very helpful. Now, he says a lot of people don't have that experience. Many people have very terrible, traumatic childhoods. I had a very difficult childhood, but on the other hand, when I look back, I realized that my grandmother gave me periods of time that were very wonderful. When I would spend a week with her, maybe 2 weeks with her when I was young. And I remember it would have been the parents of a classmate of mine when I was in high school. He especially kind of took me on. They had a boat on this is Oklahoma, and the lakes in Oklahoma were all rivers that had dams on them. And so there was one that was close to Tulsa, and they had a boat there. So the family would go there and go boating and water skiing and picnicking and so forth. And they took me along many times. I never did anything like that with my family. And Saturday night, when I was able to drive, they would have a get together frequently, and I'd go over there, and the parents would be home, and we would be a group of kids that were all in the same class in high school. We would play games and so forth. The parents would usually be in a different room. They were in the home, and it was very innocent and fun and enjoyable. When it came time to learn to drive, the girl's father would take us out on Sunday afternoon in his car, go to a parking lot of a shopping center, a strip mall. It'd be empty because the stores were closed in Oklahoma on Sunday. And then he'd put us behind the wheel one at a time, and we would drive on these empty parking lots where you couldn't run into anything unless you really got wild. And I learned how to drive that way. Never took driver's ed. And when I took my driving test, I passed it. So I think all of us can think of times when we were young, when somebody did something for us that made a difference. And if we look at those, we can appreciate again this interdependence and how what other people do can have a positive influence on us. And if we do certain things, we can have a positive influence on other people. We can learn a lot by looking back on that. And if you don't have anything like that in your life, then you can do Tonglen, or you can think about a pet, an animal that you had that meant a lot to you. There are just lots of things that can help us become more aware of the influence that other beings can have on us in a very positive way. Here is a quote. Within a family, caring for one another happens spontaneously and willingly rather than as a matter of duty imposed by law or external authority. So it's this idea of spontaneously doing something to care for another being. And that, again, it starts with a healthy family experience when you were young. He talks a lot about his own family experience, which is not always the case in the United States and other parts of the world too. There are certainly plenty of dysfunctional families in Europe, in Asia, in South America, and so forth. There's no question about that. But if we have some experience like this can be really very, very beneficial. That these kinds of family experiences, they bring out this warm feeling, this feeling of being connected, this feeling of being cared for and caring for others. It's a two-way street. If we feel cared for, we can also, it's easier for us to care for others. So he's talking about this because on the basis of this family experience, we can, you might say, zoom out to global interdependence and see how it affects the globe, the global society, by caring for others, by caring for ourselves, looking at you might say, the most vulnerable people in the world and looking at ourselves when we were very vulnerable. The very fact that we lived through the teenage years now, shall we say, we're getting close to the end of the middle age, and we're going into the phase of being elderly. And that we can look back on this and see how this made a difference in our lives and how we can make a difference in other people's lives. Again, something that I found was when my grandmother died. She was 91. I was feeling very alone and ended up volunteering at a local nursing home. And I found it very rewarding. Showing up, I just taught a little craft class, and it was just, I don't know if the word is silly, but just little things, little projects that, a person 80 years old could take part in, 85 years old. And within 2 months, I went once a week. Within 2 months, I realized that I now have 10 grandmothers. It was only women that would attend my craft class. And just showing up is all that it took to let them know that you cared. And that's what was most important. Quote Karmapa, caregivers encourage and protect our inner resources. So caregivers that care for us protect our inner resources, and giving care for other people protect our inner resources. Now, when I look back at my childhood, I can say that I learned a number of things that were positive through my parents, even though there was a lot of painful things as well. Again, I had this good, caring relationship with my grandmother and some other relatives. This relationship with the parents of this friend of mine, and so forth, that they're really, if we look closely and contemplate things, there's so much that we have learned from our childhood and since then that are really very beneficial. Now, he discusses the death of a ladybug. He and one of his sisters went to gather water and they accidentally stepped on a ladybug, and that they spontaneously decided to build little stupas out of the sand and kind of give it a proper funeral, to use a Western term. And he did that because of the training that he received from his parents. They never told him to do that to an insect that you killed, but this was the way, when a person died, what you would do is put up, especially an important person, do something that would be spiritually significant for that person. So he's saying that our parents can be our first spiritual teachers. And from that foundation, then we need to learn how to extend this feeling of connectedness, of interdependence to the entire human community. This experience of being connected within a family is an excellent starting point to grow this feeling of connection to all beings. The next section is global friendship. So this previous one that I talked about, let's see, was titled The Global Family. So now it's talking about global friendship. He starts out by saying sometimes the care that we receive from our family is taken for granted and we don't recognize it. I am reminded of the behavior of children at Christmas time, where you've got a Christmas tree set up and there are all these presents under the Christmas tree, and now it's time to open the presents, and a child will find his or her present, open it up, probably pretty quickly, ripping the wrapping paper off of the box or whatever, and then open it up, look at it a little bit, set it down, then go for the next present. And then after all the presents are emptied, the child looks at one of the parents and says, "Is that all?" They haven't enjoyed any of the presents. And they get to it, and is that all? Because the idea of getting presents is taken for granted, and they don't realize how much care really has been put into buying and wrapping up these presents. So if we can start looking at friendship, this can help us get around this obstacle that we can be making. So friendship is an intentional choice. It's a conscious choice. And as a result, it's easier to recognize this gift of friendship and appreciate it. Appreciate what friends offer us. And he says that the student-teacher relationship is an example of a friendship relationship. So the Tibetan word for teacher is a friend in virtue. quote, the emotional or mental connection between disciple and spiritual guide or virtuous friend is the most important element in the relationship. And this bond, it goes beyond the shrine room. This bond you have with your spiritual friend. He feels that it's more, if it's done properly, it's more than a student-teacher relationship. It's a friendship relationship that goes well beyond just presenting the Dharma and helping you understand the teachings. Quote, between spiritual teacher and disciple in Buddhism, as between regular friends, the disciple recognizes the positive qualities of the teacher on an emotional level and develops an appreciation and a feeling for them. Just as the teacher is committed to the growth of the disciples' positive qualities as well. So again, it's this interaction relationship. The student benefits from the teacher benefits from the student. Student can develop positive qualities by wanting to emulate the teacher. He talks about our childhood friendships, that they can continue to influence us. They can support us as our life changes. And of course, our life will change. It's inevitable that it will change. It has to, because impermanence is one of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, and it is the way things are. I posted this on Facebook a while ago, and that was that in Eau Claire, there was a restaurant a number of years ago called Just Desserts. It's kind of a play on words. And they had a sign inside the restaurant that said, life is so short, eat dessert first, or something like that. So, no, life is so uncertain, eat dessert first. And well, guess what? They went out of business. And to the best of my knowledge, they went out of business. And this shows you how uncertain life is, how uncertain business is. We're going to change, but things that we learned in childhood, we can take with us and we can apply them. In fact, we can go back and look at memories of our childhood and perhaps even gain more insight. Looking back with the wisdom that we hopefully have developed over the years. With our friends, it doesn't mean that our friends are perfect and just have good qualities, that we probably are going to have some awareness of the shortcomings of our friends. But again, we can use their qualities to help us in working with our faults, and we can, in a, shall we say, a non-judgmental way, help them work with their faults. It's amazing how, I think last week we talked about being a mirror, just by not saying anything. When a friend brings up some form of neurosis, that's saying a lot, but it will not usually upset the friend. We can enjoy the positive side of our friends and realize that what we enjoy about them and admire about them and why we like being with them has more to do with their qualities and the faults really are not a big part of the relationship we have. And quite honestly, they're probably looking at you the same way because none of us are perfect. Karmapa says if we can train ourselves to apply these principles of friendship to other relationships as well, the world will work much better. He also says, this is a quote, "Do not seek out what you do not want." In other words, don't go looking for trouble. Don't go looking for angry people. This is important. Now, the next section here is widening the lens. So these three models offer us different lenses to understand, for feeling, and developing our relationships with others. So again, there is the global community, the family community, and the friendship community. All slightly different ways of looking at our relationships. All of these can be used to sustain this feeling of connectedness and responsibility, whether it be in our friendship relationships, our family relationships, and our wider community relationships. He talks about extending our heart and mind to the wider community. And the Buddhist methods to do this, you might say, part of doctrine. They're more just methods, and these methods can be used easily by non-Buddhists. So the point is to, even if it's at all possible, to pass these methods on to other people in some way or another. The goal is for us to be able to experience the same affection and kindness, caring, tenderness, and so forth towards all sentient beings equally. That is, you might say, the goal that we're trying to achieve here. So we need to cultivate this feeling of closeness, of authentic closeness, not a fabricated closeness. One method to do this is Tonglen, and I'm going to be teaching on this soon. There are two barriers that keep us feeling separated. One is duality, separating self from other. A remedy for that, of the separating self from other, is to contemplate how important others in your life, in your lifestyle. He talks about food, technology, oxygen. My example of the mixed nuts could be broadened to any food that you buy. Even if it's produced locally, the technology for producing the food, perhaps the seed, the energy, the machinery, all of that comes from the global community. Most of our common foods have been cultivated by humanity someplace in the world for millennia, whether it be rice, wheat, tomatoes, cabbage, and so forth, that these have been cultivated for a very, very long time. And there has been selective breeding that has brought us to the present time. The selective breeding has been perhaps greatly sped up in the last 100, 200 years, all of these plants have been cultivated by humans for a very, very long time. And then, as I said, oxygen too, we share that with all humans, and we need plants to take carbon dioxide and turn it into carbon and oxygen. So the other barrier is discrimination on the basis of likes and dislikes. I like this person here, but that person there irritates me and I don't like them. So the remedy is to contemplate on the four immeasurables: immeasurable love, and the causes of happiness. Love is wanting others to be happy, wanting them, the causes of happiness. The other next is compassion, wanting others to be free of suffering and free of the causes of suffering. The third is joy or happiness, and may all beings have joy which is totally free from suffering. And then equanimity, which is may all beings feel this equality with others without paying favor to those that are close and having aversion for those that are distant. So Karmapa says that the sense of us and them has no relevance whatsoever. That's an important point to make. He also feels that minorities need a greater attention because they have a higher level of suffering. But on the other hand, these problems are solvable.